We've all been told that the self is the most obvious thing in the world. After all, you're you. But what if neuroscience says the I you experience isn't a fixed entity at all? Today we'll examine why science, philosophy and Eastern thought have all begun converging on one extraordinary idea, that the self may be more like an illusion than a thing. Later we'll see why this conclusion opens the door to an entirely different way of understanding reality. Physics, Consciousness and Reality, Dickie Dredd and Nigel Adams. And this is the last part in Chapter 6, Science, Mysticism and Illusion. So we'll also have a summary, and it's part 47 in the video series. And today we are on section 44, the word illusion, science, philosophy and the East. We've already seen how free will gets slippery and how consciousness is still unexplained. But there's another piece of the puzzle we need to look at before going further, the self. Who is this I we keep talking about? Science has poked at it for decades now, and the results are unsettling. The self, it turns out, looks less like a solid thing and more like a patchwork, a story the brain tells itself. Take the famous split brain experiments of Roger Sperry and Michael Gazzaniga in the 1960s. Patients who had the connection between their left and right hemispheres severed to treat epilepsy, not on purpose, behaved, in effect, like two minds in one skull. One hemisphere could see and respond to information the other didn't have access to. Even more striking, the left brain would often invent a plausible story to explain behaviour initiated by the right brain, a built-in confabulator. The lesson? The sense of a single, unified self is stitched together after the fact. I'll look at brain lesions and injuries. Damage to certain areas can erase memories, scramble personalities, or wipe out the ability to recognise loved ones. The I we think is continuous and essential can fracture under physical changes. Oliver Sacks wrote vivid case studies of patients who lost entire aspects of themselves, identity, even agency, through tiny strokes or tumours. If the self were some immovable essence, why would it collapse so easily when neurons misfire? More recently, brain imaging has spotlighted the default mode network, the set of brain regions that light up when you're daydreaming, reflecting or thinking about yourself. Switch off the default mode network through meditation or psychedelics, and the sense of self can dissolve entirely. Experienced meditators often report exactly this, the vanishing of the I into pure awareness. Neuroscience, in its own way, confirms that the self is a construct, not a constant. Even our everyday sense of ownership and control over the body is shaky. Experiments with the rubber hand illusion show people can be tricked into feeling that a fake hand is their own, simply by synchronizing touch and sight. Virtual reality plays the same tricks on us, bending identity with nothing more than clever feedback. All of this points to the same conclusion. The self is not a single solid entity sitting in a brain. It's a dynamic construction, stitched together from perception, memory, narrative and feedback. Useful, yes. Convincing, yes. But, like the cockpit dials or desktop icons we spoke about earlier, it may just be an interface illusion, a cartoon the brain presents so that life can run smoothly. If the self is this fragile, this malleable, then the Eastern claim that the self is an illusion, what's called anatta in Buddhism, which we'll cover, stops sounding mystical, starts sounding obvious. Neuroscience hasn't solved consciousness, but it has chipped away at the solidity of the I. What we call me looks less like an essence and more like a story, constantly rewritten. Which sets us up perfectly for what comes soon, because Buddhism, Vedanta and Taoism and others have been saying these things, or similar things, for thousands of years. So if the self is a construction rather than a permanent object, then one of the oldest ideas in Eastern philosophy suddenly deserves far more attention than many scientists have given it. Science has not proved Buddhism, Vedanta or Taoism right, but it has certainly narrowed the gap between them. This concludes Chapter 6, Science, Mysticism and Illusion. In the next video, we begin Chapter 7, transition to the East by asking a deceptively simple question. What happens when language itself reaches its limits? We'll begin with the limits of language, then when words collapse. So, before we move on, we'll do a quick summary of Chapter 6. So the theme of illusion has shown us how fragile our categories can be. Science, for all its rigour, must guard against the temptation to borrow mystical glamour, just as spirituality risks cheapening itself by dressing in lab coats. Yet the very persistence of such crossovers tells us something important. We are drawn to the edges, to the places where explanation falters and mystery beckons. That is where Chapter 7 begins. Having tested the limits of physics, neuroscience and philosophy, we now turn eastward to traditions that never separated knowledge, practice and meaning in the way Western science has. Here the brain is not only an organ to be studied, but a gateway to the self. Words collapse under their own weight, and indigenous ways of knowing offer different forms of truth. In moving from critique to encounter, we step into a dialogue that will shape the rest of the book, a journey where East and West do not simply clash, but challenge and sometimes illuminate one another.